Good evening and good morning to those who are coming from the Philippines and the rest of the world, and good evening to those who are coming in from North America. I want to welcome you to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Brother Katie, and I will be your presenter as I am most months. I want to welcome everyone back from our brief summer break. We were off last month. We had a big, large Masonic convention here at headquarters, and I'm happy to say it went very well. So we're happy to be back, though, and be working on Masonic Seminar Series. This month, we will be talking about the art of Freemasonry. And for those who are coming from different platforms or maybe new to the Masonic Seminar Series, each month is a standalone topic that doesn't necessarily rely on any other previous knowledge. Here at Universal Co-Masonry, which is the creator and supporter of the Masonic Seminar Series, we get people who inquire around the globe every day throughout the year. So we wanted to make sure that we created some type of platform that was conducive to the person who was learning about Freemasonry, who was curious or wanted to apply and become a Mason. So we have a wide range of knowledge base. We have a wide range of individuals coming. Some people have been with me since 2018 when we started, and some people are just joining for the first time. So whoever you are, we're grateful that you are here. When I say we, I'm not talking about me, myself, and I'm talking about the other brothers that are in this room with me. I have Brother Patrick Alessandra and Brother Benjamin Hartle, who are running the various platforms and ITs. We are streaming from Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and we're also coming in on Zoom. So we are expanding that base. So lots going on, and happy to hear that the Masonic Seminar Series has been so well received. So a little bit of house rules about how to make sure the evening goes smoothly. Tonight, you'll see a presentation, as I always disclaim, is something that I have worked on myself. This is my own interpretation of, in this case, the art of Freemasonry. It is not the position of Universal Co-Masonry in any way, but it is my own understanding. And for those who were with me last year when I presented it, it's a totally different presentation, because you know me, I don't like presenting the same thing twice. So I have changed it, updated it, and made it something new and different as my own understanding of the art of Freemasonry expands and evolves. So if we look at the format that we're going to have, it's mostly a lecture style series. So I will be talking quite a bit. I hope that's okay. If you're looking for more of a discussion type group, you can check out our Masonic Philosophical Society, and they will definitely be more of that style as they present on the East Coast, the West Coast. We have French, Portuguese, and Spanish as well. So lots of platforms, lots of places for you to get connected with Freemasonry. So the next hour and a half or so, we'll talk about the art of Freemasonry. I'll ask some questions here and there, get some insight. We have made sure that we can't get bombed by any type of platform, so we apologize that we had to put you guys all on mute and have to ask you to unmute yourselves, or ask us to unmute you when it's time to talk, just so that we can keep the quietness of the discussion this evening. At the end of the Masonic Seminar Series, I will be staying on for about 10-15 minutes to answer any questions that you have, either specifically about the presentation, or if you have questions about Freemasonry in general, or if you're looking to apply to Freemasonry, I can help you with all of those. The one thing I will request from you, and this is the last thing, and then we'll get started, is that your questions, if you have them, please use your virtual hand option to ask them, but please make sure they're on topic, because sometimes we'll get questions that really derail the conversation, and we want to make sure that we come and discuss what we have scheduled to discuss this evening. So without further ado, and I'm looking off to my right here because I have my computer's off to the right, so I apologize. It kind of looks weird. Let me just pull up my presentation for you. All right. So this particular presentation is a little bit, I would say, they're all intimate in some various form or fashion, but this one's really, really personal. And I'm not looking for personal stories or share outs or anything like that, but it really has a lot to do with you, has a lot to do with me. And ironically, it has something to do with all of us here who have come in to listen and be a part of this discussion in this lesson. So I hope you'll find that there, at the end of this, that there's something that you can take away from this presentation. There are some people who think that art is going to be a topic about, literature or poetry. I hope I surprise you. I may not, but I hope I surprise you in what it is that we're going to be talking about, the art of Freemasonry. So why did I pick this topic? When we look at Masonry, it is said in its rituals that Freemasonry is a science and an art. And so that's where I'm pulling it from. It wasn't something I just pulled out of the ethers, but it is something that is taught to us, and we are taught throughout Masonry that we are an art and a science. In a previous series, I did cover the science part, and if you missed that, don't worry. We'll present that sometime next year. And this time, we'll be talking about the art. So there's a difference in this, the phrasing, the art of Freemasonry versus Freemasonry as an art. And I understand that technical distinction. I really want to look at the art of Freemasonry and understanding it. First, we'll lay some definitions down, and then we'll get into the heart of what we're going to talk about after I ask you a question here, after these definitions. The one thing about art I find is that everyone has an opinion on art, and some of it's educated and some of it is not. And sometimes I'll throw myself into one of those uneducated opinions. But when you really look at art, art is not in the eye of the beholder. Art is actually very, very specific. There are certain things that are beautiful and certain things that are not. And when you look at civilization across the world and across history, you'll see that certain recurring themes keep coming up that are beautiful and that are pleasing to the human eye. We can talk about the outliers, they do exist, but when you look at the main frame of art, there's usually there's kind of a Goldilocks period in there. I always balk at hotel art because I feel like I could do better art, and I'm not an artist in any way. So I don't understand how that's art. And there's that conversation that has to be had. So this definition, I'm sure there's 25 people that will disagree with it, but I will ask you to go with me on this definition as I found it to be the most common one and is the one that tonight's presentation is predicated upon. So the definition is something that is created with imagination and skill, and that is beautiful or that expresses important ideas or feelings. So when we look at this particular definition, we're looking at the keyword beautiful and ideas and feelings. Those are the keywords that we'll be going back to throughout the evening. Again, when we look at words, they need context. Context helps frame out what that word means. And so I wanted to give the etymology. And here's where we might see Freemasonry and art come together. So the etymology, so where did the word come from? The term art is related to the Latin word ars, meaning art, skill, or craft. The first known use of the word comes from the 1200 manuscripts. The key word in that, the craft, because that is another name for Freemasonry, is the craft. So just in the way that we speak about Masonry, we're using artistic terms, the craft. So tonight, when we look at the context, we're looking at the word, the craft. We're looking at something that has skill and that is beautiful, that expresses closest to the nature of that particular feeling. There are different modalities of art, and I bring them in because they're very, very important as Freemasonry will be using some of these in its rituals. So you have painting, sculpture, literature, architecture, theater, film, and music. These are all different types of art, and you have a lot of subdivisions within that. I'm sure we could have a list ad nauseum that would go multiple slides of listing all the different ones. When we look at all of these different arts, when we look at architecture, which to me, I have to say, I love all art. I genuinely do. I would put architecture at the top for myself because that, if it's genuine, beautiful architecture, it tends to last centuries upon centuries, and it holds captive, it kind of freezes a thought that was existing hundreds of years, if not thousands of years ago. And I find architecture to be very, very beautiful. And in fact, in Freemasonry, we use the word architecture quite a bit because architecture, if we look at the 5 different capitals that exist at least in Greek and Roman times, you have Ionic, Doric, Corinthian, Tuscan, and Composite. And those are different types of architectures. And in Freemasonry, we talk about those type of architectures, and we use those to help us build out ideas and to create things. But architecture is one of my favorite. You ask any brother, they're going to have different modes of architecture that really speak to them. And they put some different things up here just to kind of show you have Hamlet, you have paintings, you have music, you have Christ the Redeemer down in Brazil, in Rio. If you ever have a chance to go down and see that, is absolutely amazing. And then on the far left of your screen is The Magic Flute, which is an opera by Mozart, which is a Masonic opera. If you ever have the chance to go watch it, I would highly recommend it. That opera is very, very beautiful and very esoteric. But I have a question for you, which normally I don't ask a lot of questions, but I think this one we'll see a lot of answers coming forward. And so the question is to, no matter the type of art, independent of the artist, where does inspiration come from? Because I would isolate inspiration as the source of art, right? Someone feels inspired to do something. Mozart felt inspired to do the magic flute. Where did that come from? And that's my question for you. I'm going to open up the floor to our visitors here that are on Zoom to answer that question. And it can be personal, like art for me is this. Try not to make it personal story time hour, but just where does inspiration come from? And I'd like to stop and open up the floor for our Zoom viewers to tell us, where does their inspiration come from? See a lot of blank faces. I know you guys are all scared. No one bites. Brother Maya, without fail, I know I can trust you. Brother Maya, tell us, where does inspiration come from?
Well, I think it depends on the person and sort of how they're oriented to the world. You know, some people gather their inspiration from their sensory experience, whether it's feelings or tactile sensations, things that, you know, they experienced that were joyful or interesting on some sensory level. And then there are others that are more mentally oriented or maybe transpersonally oriented, like spiritually. And maybe they derive their inspiration from an idea or a thought or some kind of intuition or realization that they had, and they're trying to communicate that in some media that helps them to externalize it.
Thank you, Brother Maya. Brother Loretta or Brother Mark? I'm not sure which one raised their hand. Oh, Brother Loretta, you shut off your camera instead of unmuting yourself. Let's go to Brother Danielle while Brother Loretta gets her camera resituated. Brother Danielle?
So for myself, I like to woodwork, and that's a kind of art that I really enjoy. And one of the things that I find great inspiration from are patterns in nature, and the geometries of nature, and the way that I think the great architect designs the world. And by seeing that, I gain inspiration to make my own designs.
Brother Loretta?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what's going on with my phone. Well, that's very much what I, in some respects, was going to say, that I think in many respects, inspiration comes from nature in some way or another. I mean, if it's architecture, you see, you know, those things replicate things in nature, maybe like mountains or whatever. But it comes from nature, and it's represented by mathematics. For example, if you have a beautiful painting, there's certain mathematical rules, like the golden ratio. As something we say is beautiful, a lot of times the golden ratio's in it, or other kinds of mathematical things, and formulas. So anyway, I was going to say that, but I think it's very much can be represented by mathematics.
Thank you, Brother Loretta. David, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that some, not all, but some art does gain inspiration from what we can't entirely put words to. Like the notion in esotericism that the sensations, certain realizations you really can't verbalize because they're not meant to be verbalized. I think in that similar vein, art can be inspired and drawn from those inexplicable sources that really allow for a deeper understanding or a deeper invoked feeling from the piece itself.
Okay. We'll come back to something you said in there, David. So I'm glad you made the comment that you did. Let's go with Brother Margaret. And we'll go Brother Christopher, and then we'll go forward.
Yeah, kind of back on the same vein as what David just said. I think artists have a spectrum of what inspires them, and for some artists, it's to bring forth emotion in their audience. You know, you want them to feel what you felt, but for other artists, it's more of that almost divine kind of level that you want to bring down into your art. So you're looking in an inexplicable place instead of, and then you could say that all artists are seeing that inexplicable piece, whether it's a landscape or, something to convey emotion. But yes, thank you.
Thank you. And Brother Christopher.
Thank you, Brother Katie. To be honest, I actually don't know. It's very difficult to describe. And like so many people have said, it's difficult to put into words, even though we often try. And like with what Brother Margaret was saying, inspiration, it's difficult. It can be divine. It can be through meditation, through our experiences, through just what we know in our nature and what we see around us. We try to bring that in and explain it and maybe beautify it and hopefully beautify it at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. So everyone has they overlap. I wouldn't say they're the same description of where inspiration comes from, but it comes from that part within us that seems to be incommunicable through verbal language. Like we can't necessarily, we can do it with poetry, literature, film, theater, that type of stuff. Even dance could be, kinesthetic. But when we look at the inspiration that we have, I always think about the artist's discontent. It's like, oh, I hate my artwork, or I hate my, my book, or whatever. There's always some flaw in it, and they're always upset about it. And I wonder if that unhappiness comes from the fact that what their inspiration is giving them, that form that's coming from them, is not quite perfectly put on whatever medium it's going on. And so there's a disconnect between like, this is what I saw, but this is what I could only make with the tools and skill I have. And so there's that disconnect. And we start to see with that idea that inspiration is something that is, I think it's an inherent human trait. Everyone has inspiration in some sort of style. I'm not saying everyone's an artist, but we all have experienced inspiration. And it seems like it comes from some place that is beyond the single individual. It's something that is beyond us. It's esoteric. It's something that's deeper into the reality and fabric of nature. So where does that take us? So I want to focus on that inspiration. And I'm going to tie this into Freemasonry here in a little bit. So please don't think that I've lost my way. So when we talk about inspiration, we're really talking about something that is known as thought forms. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And that's the liaison between art and Freemasonry, is the key phrase, thought form. There are 3 great quotes that I found. Every artist dips his brush in his own soul and paints his own nature into his pictures. I want you to keep that particular quote by Beecher in your head, because that's going to be important. Here we have from Modine: the artist must create a spark before he can make a fire, and before art is born, the artist must be ready to be consumed by the fire of his own creation. Very Phoenix-like. And from one of my favorite artists, William Blake: if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. All of these 3 quotes have something to do with thought forms. So what are thought forms? I'm not going to read this to you. You know how to read. This is taken from the Mahatma letters that were written to A.P. Sennett and A.O. Hume as well. But what is a thought form? I'm just going to narrate it over this particular paragraph. Thought forms are something that emanate from us. Each one of us creates thought forms. I don't think anyone would necessarily, try to dismiss that notion. But thought forms is not just from the brain as an organ. It comes from one of the bodies of man. Man is multiple layers. It's not just the physical and the spirit. How do you get, this is going into the scientific realm, how do you get two unlike substances to live at least somewhat in harmony, to live and coexist in the same space? And what I mean by that is you have the spirit or soul, however you would like to define that, that's fine. You have the spirit or the soul of an individual, and you have the material form of that individual. They are not made of the same substance. So how do you get one to coexist at least somewhat harmoniously within the other? And in science, we call that emulsification, right? Is the blending of those parts. And in Freemasonry, I've said it in the past, we're trying to emulsify unlike substances. To take it out of that scientific speak and put it in an artistic speak is, how do you get from the spirit to the body? Where does one portion of that body start and go into another? And we see throughout all different types of ancient philosophies, both Western and primarily Eastern, you'll see that man is not composed of just two. That man is composed of several different bodies. And depending on the different practice, depends on how many bodies there are. 3 bodies, 2 bodies, 7 bodies, that's a different lecture to talk about. But when we look at thought forms is not coming straight from, your inspiration isn't coming from your mind. It is an emanation of your being. And it is going to create an entity unto itself. So here we see the first 3 words, thoughts are things, meaning that when you start having that inspiration, when you start to experience a thought form, it is going to have both vibration, which is going to make it a wave, and it's going to be a particle, which is going to make it a form, right? There's that like and unlike interaction. And when you start to emanate this comes from 2 different parts of your bodies according to one particular tradition. And that comes from your mental body, which is all around, as well as your desire body, which is also all around. I picked this particular picture just because I thought it illustrated the emanations coming off of the body. But there's lots of different ones you can look at. But when we look at it, when we create something, whether it is an amazing product at work, a project that we did fantastic on, whether it is truly in the realm of the arts and we did this particular part of a play sensationally, or if it's in Masonic drama, which is theater, we are creating thought forms. And these thought forms are very much like a piece of art that once they're created, they no longer belong to the artist, but they belong to the egregore in which that thought form was created. What do I mean by egregore? Brother Patrick, will you put egregore or Brother Benjamin in the chat? So that way, if someone's not familiar with the word, they can look that up. The egregore is akin, not the same, but if you're familiar with Jungian psychology and the collective unconscious, it's somewhat like that, but it's very different. It's like if there was a cloud above all of us that we were all feeding into, our thoughts, feelings, and desires, passions, whatever, and we were putting that into this cloud that was above us, that would be the egregore. So if you are in your home and you live with other people, whether they're roommates or family members, doesn't matter, there is an egregore that is being built around your home as the inhabitants within your home are adding to that with their thought forms. So these thought forms, they're neutral in the fact that they exist, but there are positive thought forms and there are negative thought forms. Not all thought forms are created the same. So when we look at where these thought forms are coming from, this inspiration of art in our particular conversation, it's coming from these bodies. And there are 3 different forms or different principles, I guess is the word I'd use, on which thought forms are founded upon. Quality, which is going to give you color. So some people might think, if I said, what is the color red mean to you? And you would tell me, well, that means love or fear or anger or whatever. So it determines the color of the thought. Your thoughts have colors. Right now, you're thinking, hopefully, and it has color to it. It's starting to create something. It has a nature to it. So it's going to create a form. Not all thought forms are created the same. They're not going to all look the same. And they're not all, for the A-type personality, they're not all perfect little lines with 90-degree angles. They're very abstract, some of them. Some of them are very definite, which brings us to the next next one, which is definiteness. When we look at the definiteness of something, it is the clarity. So is it very faded or is it very distinct, and anything in between that? So when we look at these different types of thought forms, right now, all of us are creating thought forms. I created a thought form when I started working on this presentation, and I started putting things together, and I started thinking about it, and it started coming out. I desired to create something that was meaningful to you and that was beneficial, educational to you. That was my desire, and it was emanating, not again from this organ up here, but from the entire body on a different level than the physical form. And then you have other parts. So you have the mental body, again, mental being the whole, not just isolated here. And you're looking at a more denser form of the astral body, which is that which is made up of cosmic particles. So when you look at these thought forms, they're being created. They're being created all the time. Right now, as I said, you're creating a thought form. When we think of thought forms, you create something and that inspiration comes out, and then you don't have control over it anymore. And we can create movements off of this. Universal suffrage is a movement. Our current gender questioning is a movement. If we look at postmodernism is a movement. There's millions of movements throughout history. These were all created from thought forms. Interestingly enough, thought forms can come to two different ways. It can be something that's divinely inspired. I'd like to think that Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and the great artists of the world throughout history and time were divinely inspired with their various beautiful sculptures and paintings and friezes and architecture. Or it can be something that is intuitive out of you yourself. So even if it's divinely inspired, it still comes through the more denser parts of your body. And so when we look at this type of thought forms, Freemasonry is very, very interested in these thought forms, because thought forms create your perception. So if we think of ourselves, this is a rhetorical question, so please don't raise your hand. If I were to ask you, how do people perceive you? Do you think that you're a happy person, stoic person, a stable person, a dramatic person, a liar? I mean, how do people perceive you? And this is a very important question, because oftentimes I've heard it over the years, as all of us have heard, we can't control how people see us. And I think that's the biggest farce on the entire planet. We absolutely can control how people perceive us. We do that by what we are emanating from our body movements, from our energy. We talk a lot about energy. We can see energy signatures off of people, and we can see it off of objects. We control every day, every minute, how someone will interact with us. If I sat here before you came on and I was sitting there and I looked mad, I don't think you'd find this very inviting. You maybe want to shut off your screen and go do something that might have been a little bit more enjoyable to be a part of. So when we look at this, my thought forms, even in this two-dimensional experience that you're having, my thought forms are still interacting. They're still being perceived. And so when we look at a Freemason, it's my hope that when you see a Freemason, that the thought form that's been given off and that is perceived is one of virtue, of valor, of living a life worthy of remembering, as these high ideals. But only the individual person can control what is being sent out, right? Yeah, you may have bad stuff that happened to you in your day and your life and childhood, but you are in control of how that's processed inwardly and how that is projected outwardly. Now, I want to take a step back, and I want to talk a little bit about some of you guys are like, oh my God, she's going to go into The Secret and some new age thing about, I'm going to manifest money in a car and it's going to show up in my driveway in bags and it's going to be, that's not what I'm talking about. The idea of thought forms influenced the new age movement and has taken its own life, if you will, again, in par with what we're talking about. That thought form was created, that thought forms exist, and that we can control that thought form, which we'll talk about here in a minute. We can control that thought form. And that thought form was taken by the New Age movement and was created into its own idea. In its essence, in the Buddhic philosophy, tulpa would be the closest form to the word of thought form. When we look at these different philosophies, they're not talking about, imagining material wealth and happiness, if those two can even go in tandem. it's talking about something deeper, something more divine. And that's why I say this is much more personal, because this is something that has to do with you and that which you believe in is the highest. What are you manifesting? What is the quality of your thoughts to do? I think it was Marcus Aurelius who did the quality of thoughts, or is that Socrates? If you know it, you can throw it in the chat. It's one of those great people. The quality of our thoughts. If we look at the nature of our thoughts, in Masonry, we are taught to control our vain and unbecoming thoughts, to help put them in check, because they can take over. They're like weeds in a garden. If you leave them unattended, they will become your garden, and you don't want that. So the nature, what do those forms look like? How are they coming together? You are the author of your experience, and you are the author of other people's experience and how they engage with you. So when we look at thought forms, we are creating art every second. Any second that we are interacting and we're putting forth our energy and we're thinking of things and we're trying to create, it doesn't matter how technical to that which is extremely, artistic, anything in between is a thought form. The interesting thing is, I've often heard people talk about different architectures. We look at temples back in the day, they popped up all over different continents, even though trade wasn't, ships weren't going across to the New World. How did they know? How did different cultures know to build something similar in their architecture if they had zero communication? And again, I would say there was a thought form that either they accessed, or that it was divinely inspired, or they intuited it and shared it with, there's a lot of different ways. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg type of question. There's a lot of different ways that could have interacted. So Freemasonry is very, very invested in the thought forms of its members, because it wants the very best for humanity and for the individual. So how do we do this? I'll get there in 1 second. Here's this is from Thought Forms by Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater, who are Theosophists. Annie Besant was one of our most puissant Grand Commanders, which is the head of the order back in the turn of the century. And they have this particular color spread in their book, The Thought Forms. And I wanted to just bring it out because it's interesting. And I wanted to separate it so you could see the writing and make it a little bit bigger. But if I do that, it messes up the form. Or the illustration. So if you look here in the upper left-hand corner, number 1, this is the color that they perceive of high spirituality. These aren't arbitrary. You can read the book and it can tell you how they got the colors. And that's something that's beyond the scope of our conversation. But there's in their understanding of thought forms that when you think certain things, it's going to take on different shades. And you have high spirituality on the left, and it goes down and you can see green, which we'll talk about a little bit later, sympathy. If you jump over here in column 4, row 3, so we're looking at selfish or affection, depending on the context. Remember, colors are symbols too. And if you ever have a chance to listen to our symbols lecture, if you didn't have the chance back in January, I think it was, or February, colors are symbols and they require context. So you seeing red, even though that saying means that you're angry, it could also mean that you're deeply in love, depending on the context. So these are the different type of colors that you have. Down here, black is malice, which we'll see here in a little bit. Up here, we have selfish religious feeling in the upper right. So that's kind of the color scheme that Besant and Leadbeater laid out for their thought forms. Keep that in mind as we go forward. So thought forms are created by emotions, which I think we all can get behind, experience, meditation, and music. And when I say meditation, I would also include prayer, even though I think they are different modalities to commune with the divine. They are in the same category that they are communion with the divine. So you have emotions. And when we look at emotions, you can have very erratic emotions, which go into passions. And passions are going to be those emotions that are out of check. So modern day passions has become a good thing. Like, I'm very passionate about said thing. But if you look at the etymology of that word, it really means to suffer, that you have such an extreme emotion that you're genuinely suffering. So that is the context that I'm using it in. So you can have emotions that make you super, aggressive, or super in love, or super whatever. Those emotions become passions, and those produce their own very, when I say violent, I don't mean it like, I don't know if you know what I mean by violent, but it's a very high frequency is the best way I could say it. vibration of a thought form. So it's going to create a different color, because we know that colors are related to vibrations, and thought forms are going to be based on vibration and form. Your experience can also create thought forms. So like you're just getting married. How does that feel compared to a divorce or a loss or a birth, or, you know, some great thing? You graduated from said school, you know, whatever it is, or you finally found what you were looking for in your spiritual needs. All of those would create thought forms. And think about them. Just take a moment to reflect on the different thought forms that are emanating from all of you. One of the tricks in understanding this is that whenever I say thought forms, my initial knee-jerk reaction is to go to my brain and say, oh, what am I thinking? When really it's a whole body experience. So what is your whole body experiencing? And what does that look like? What is it pushing off? Meditation and prayer. Off the cuff, I would say that meditation is going to be different from prayer, and that meditation they're both receptive, but I would say meditation tends to be more receptive because you just sit back and you let you unzip your spiritual brain and you let the divine just download whatever the divine needs to tell you, and you let that in there and then you process. That's the active part. Where prayer is going to be more active in that you're speaking with the divine, and you're actually trying to use some type of language to interact with that which is highest. And they are different, so they're going to produce different outcomes. And then music, we'll see a little bit here at the end, what music can do. But what was it? It just was running around on Facebook where it's like, was it you, Brother Benjamin, that was telling me about how they put different music behind one of the movies? And it like totally made this, it totally made the scene totally different. It was like supposed to be, was it Lord of the Rings? And they played it different.
Harry Potter.
It was Harry Potter. Yeah. Deep conversations here at the general office. We were talking about Harry Potter, and they changed the music down, and it completely changed the context of the scene and how you interacted with that scene. Freemasonry has music in it. It does. And if you don't play the right music at the right part, it doesn't work as well. And I, having been the person having to play the music and chose the wrong thing, have learned that. Also being someone that sits in the lodge and someone's playing music and it's like, I don't want to pick that piece that puts me in a different place. And, versus that piece just, man, that was empowering. And I just feel, this thought form starts generating out of me that I would not have had otherwise. So there's a lot of different ways that we can create it. We see that governments use music. Let's take the US government. Let's take, better yet, the NFL. Now you can take any sport. But if you look at sports, they don't play, Tchaikovsky's symphonies right before, the Super Bowl. Right. And they're not playing Mozart at halftime shows. They're playing different types of music because they're creating a different type of thought form than the other musics that they're picking. So music has a very, very strong impact on our thought forms, and emotions and experiences. They all kind of overlap. So one particular idea I think of, we have a mountain here in Colorado, which is Pikes Peak. It's just south here of us in headquarters. And it's going to the very top. Sometimes we'll take brothers that are from other countries to Pikes Peak so they can see the whole, front range of the Rocky Mountains. And we'll be on the very top of this 14er, and just the beauty of the front range and just the emotions that behind it. And it makes you want to meditate with the divine. Like, imagine the thought form that is being experienced there versus, you're sitting somewhere where you don't want to be and you're hearing something you don't want to hear and you just want to tune out. Very different thought forms. So 3 different classes of thought forms that I think we should look at, because part of bringing this thought forms into your understanding, if you're not familiar with it already, is to make you master of them rather than just the creator, because there is a difference. When you look at being the master of it, you understand why those thought forms are being created, and you can be mindful of how they're being created. So when we look at being mindful and we look at being aware, we're looking at there's a consciousness to it, because once that thought form is released, it can be good and it can be built upon, or it can be broken down depending on who's adding into that thought form. So example I brought up was the gender discussion that we have here in the United States. That's the thought form. And all of us are putting our thought forms in it when we think about it. It doesn't matter if it's a good thought form or a negative thought form. Like, we're all adding to it. And that causes that thought form to ebb and flow in size and in quality and in its definiteness. So we are all putting our energy into things. And again, this isn't that new age, like, be mindful and have quality of thought. Like, they took that from this particular idea, but I think they've lost, some of them, not everyone, they've lost that, the anchorage, the ownership of it. Like, steeping yourself and being conscious in the classes of thought forms that exist will help you be master of that. I thought it was appropriate to put the image of the thinker with the thinker from Paris. I thought that was pretty clever on my behalf. But so the image of the thinker, this was really interesting because this is where, like, if I was like, okay, I want you guys to imagine, pick the place where you wish you could be right now, which is obviously Masonic seminar. So second place, like, where do you want to be outside of Masonic seminar? Where do you want to be right now? And I want you to imagine yourself, and I want you to put your whole body into that experience. The thought form is being created right now from you and is physically going to sit in that place according to some beliefs, that you're literally putting that thought form. So if you're like me, you're a mountain girl and you love the mountains, that thought form is sitting on top of Pikes Peak, looking down at the mountain range. Maybe it's the beach. Maybe it's you want to be at work. God help you if that's your answer, that your thought form is sitting at your desk, working right now. That's the image of the thinker. So your mind, where do you want to be right now, is going to be projected out of your body and is going to be put into that place that you're thinking of. Image of an object, I think, is pretty straightforward. So what happens is that when you're creating something, so let's say you're writing a book, and we talked about Harry Potter, as Harry Potter is being written, or one of your great books is being written or has been written. As you're thinking of that book and you're writing it, you're creating object and you're creating space that didn't exist. You're moving things out of the way so that image can be projected from you, from your body, from your thought form, and brought into that space so that it can sit and be copied by you. This is a lot like the Platonic forms, if you're familiar with those. You can have the perfect chair. Like, if you think of the perfect chair, right, that's the form. And then you're going to be like Brother Danielle said, she likes to do woodworking. So she's going to create that perfect chair in real life. So she is creating space for that chair to exist. And then she's going to try to replicate what she sees in her mind's eye and what her body's thought form is creating for her. And then she's going to try to stamp that into physicality. That is the image of an object, which I think most of us are pretty comfortable with, because that's often like still our, we think about holding the object and trying to replicate it, but it can be many different modalities. This is the one that's more for revolutions and societal movements, but an image that takes a form entirely on its own. So the part, I'm going to read this because I think it says it best. The intrinsic qualities that creates the thought form is unique to the matter from which it draws from. So if you create this thought form, okay, it will leave, if it's in this category, it will leave you and it will go to take on its own life elsewhere. This is, like I was saying, like with Foucault and Derrida, with the postmodernism, you have the universal suffragists and the suffragettes, all of this stuff, like these egregores come from something else and they take on a life of its own, which is pretty scary, because some of the thoughts I have, I hope they don't fall in this last category, because I don't want that impact, because that's a huge responsibility and a huge ramification, especially if it is a negative thought form. So when you sit there and you think about thought forms in the coming days and months, hopefully, think about what you're creating in the moment. Are you creating something that's about you? Is this about something else? Or is it something that is coming all on its own? Another element to this, before we get into the Masonic portion, which is pretty heavy, another component of this is how our thought forms impact ourselves. So if I'm coming home from work every day and I'm really upset, and that's all I keep putting out in the egregore of my form, that's the thought form I keep exuding out of myself, it impacts me, because that thought form isn't fleeting. It's not Snapchat, right? It's not like it takes a picture of itself and then just disappears, right? It comes back, and that's all I know about Snapchat, so don't ask me anymore about that. When you look at it, it's long lasting, it sustains, and especially if you keep adding to it every day, and how that impacts you. So, when we look at the different thought forms that are over your particular country or your nation, how is that impacting you? And you can sit there and say, I don't care about that, but it doesn't mean it doesn't impact, because we know that waves come together. You have constructive amplification and you have destructive amplification. And when we look at a constructive, that means that my thoughts are in harmony with what's coming in, that thought form that's outside of myself, and it magnifies it. It makes it bigger. So if it's a negative thought and a negative thought's coming in, it's going to be negative. Conversely, if I come in and I just love what I'm doing and life is great and I constantly am doing that every day, that changes. I mean, you can feel it in my own intonation and the way I move, just in the variation of my voice, that there's a different thought form that comes from that, man, life is good. And so if I'm coming in and everything's great and I keep building on that thought form and my spouse comes in and everything's great, we're going to amplify that. And it's going to create more and more of a harmonious to me and my spouse, right? Environment, whether that's a harmonious in the negative sense or positive sense, is up to the thought form practitioner. Likewise, if we look at thought forms and how they impact us, think about the pregnant woman who has a child, right? And that child is growing inside of that woman. Their thoughts matter. We've always heard that as pregnant people, we've always heard, like, you know, be careful what you think because your baby can hear it. And it's like, well, I don't have ears yet. So what do you mean? You know, like, that's very literal and very dense. But when you look at it, it's like, well, when I create a thought form and I'm pregnant, that child is sitting in those thought forms as we speak and is gestating and is growing. Likewise, if you look at the world as a pregnant mother, Mother Earth, and we're all inside of the earth, we can think that the thoughts that are happening on a global scale are going to impact our well-being and our growth. And so that's why it's really, really important that we become aware. So how do these two come together? Thought forms and Freemasonry. So I'm going to tangent really quick, and it's going to feel like a tangent. It's really not a tangent. It's going to help me get you back to art in a minute. But if we're the artists of our own thoughts, if we are the ones that are taking care of putting these thoughts forms out into the world and into our homes and our lives, how do we control that? Because it's nice to know that those things exist, but how do I make that applicable? As I said in the past, I'm an applied Mason. I like to take things I learn and I want to apply them, because if I can't apply them, then why am I learning them? I'm pretty straightforward in that way. There's theoretical Masons that will sit and just hypothesize all the great and wonderful things and then not apply it, and that's not me. So I was like, well, how do we apply this? How do we control and become master of our thought form so that we can create what we want to live in? So let's talk about how we do that. So let's talk a little bit about the ancient and accepted universal right. These are the degrees within Universal Co-Masonry, which is the Masonic order here that, as I said in the beginning, that created and supports the Masonic seminar. This is the ladder of progression. These are the different degrees that you will take if you are a member or wanting to join and are accepted. These are the degrees that you will take if you make it all the way to the very top. So you start at the bottom. Entered Apprentice is the first degree. Fellow Craft is the second degree, and Master Mason is the third degree. You can say I'm a third degree or a Master Mason. They are truly synonymous. Just like a second degree is synonymous with a Fellow Craft, and a first degree is synonymous with Entered Apprentice. So collectively, these are called the symbolic degrees. So everyone who's ever a Mason, ever, always starts on the entered. You do not come in as a third or second degree. That is not how things are done in any obedience. So you start at the Entered Apprentice. Now, if you look at Masonry, you go online and you Google it, and the different types of degrees. You have the Scottish Rite and you have the York Rite or English Rite. They're different ladders. So in most organizations, I'm going to tell you what everyone does, and then I'm going to tell you what we do. Most organizations, you come in, you do the first 3 degrees, right? And then you go and choose. You go to another organization and choose either to do the Scottish Rite or you can do the English Rite. There's just there's a lot of different bodies that you can go to. That's not how we do it here in Universal Co-Masonry. We have one progressive ladder, as they're called. This is how you descend, or ascend, I should say. And the reason why I find that this particular method is far more superior is because it gives you the complete story of Masonry from the first degree all the way to the top. It builds up the entire story, because Masonry is a drama. It is theater. It is ritual. It is music. It is incense. It is meditation. It is prayer. It's all of the only thing I don't think it is film. Like, we don't record anything. I mean, I know some Masonic obediences do. We do not record rituals. That's probably the one thing I'd leave out. But it is all different types of art forms. It's poetry. It's literature. It's what am I leaving out? It's even paintings. There's paintings in there too. There's all sorts of different stuff. And so when you go in, you do the first 3 degrees. So that builds in the narrative. That gets you started on the story. But once you become a Master Mason, helps if I go the right way. You have the Mark Master Mason, and always more to Mark Master Mason is a Royal Arch Mason degree. These are degrees that you would take. And then we like to call this the HRA because Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem is a lot to say, so we call it the HRA. So these are the 3 degrees that you have. Now, collectively, these are called the English Rite. So what we have done at Universal Co-Masonry is our ladder, instead of you going and choosing different places to go, it unified the English and the Scottish. So the Scottish Rite is going to be the Lodge of Perfection, and that's the 4th through the 14th degree. So in our obedience, what you do is it's one ladder. So you would go 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd, Mark, Royal Arch Mariner, HRA, then the 14th. You take that top degree of the 14th, which is going to give you all of the degrees underneath it, the 4th through the 13th. So you have both the English Rite, which tends to be more devotional. Scottish Rite tends to be, when I say intellectual, I don't mean in the sterile sense of intellectual, but it tends to be more of a mental, like one's mystical and one's occult is another way of looking at it. So in our particular obedience, you would go through both the English and the Scottish Rite. Now, the reason why these kind of both exist is that they are the same story in different words. So the Lodge of Perfection, that Scottish Rite is going to say the same story as the English Rite, just using different characters and dramas and whatnot. So that's the progression here. After the Lodge of Perfection, you have the chapter degrees, and that's the 5th through the 18th, followed by the philosophic, and then you have administrative degrees. This is the pyramid of the ancient and accepted universal rite here at Universal Co-Masonry. There's always something to work forward towards. It's not necessarily to collect degrees like you're getting ornaments on a tree. It's more about getting tools to help you fine-tune your thought forms. I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in a second. I want to stop here because I've kind of gone a lot and just see if there are any questions over thought forms before I get into how they specifically tie into the degrees. And I want to know if there's any question over this particular ladder. So I'm going to leave my screen up just for a minute to make sure that people get to see it and see if there are any questions that are coming from you guys about what has been talked about thus far. You guys are all pros? You make my job easy. I'm sure there's a question somewhere. Brother Nathan.
Yeah, so can you again just clarify the connection between the English Rite and the 3 bottom ladders you have there from the 4th through the 13th? Are you saying that the Mark Master Mason is associated with the 4th through the 8th degree in the Scottish Rite?
No, and I'm glad you asked that because it was really, really hard when I was doing this image because I wanted to just kind of blend the Lodge of Perfection from the 4th to the 14th, but it looked really bad. These all have their own stories on the right. So the Mark is not the 4th through the 18th. They have similar, I would say on the whole, I'm trying to make sure my words are accurate. On the whole, they tell a general story that is the same, but the parts and pieces are very, very different. So the Royal Arch Mason does not relate to the 9th through the 11th. And, next year I'll probably change that slide just so I don't make that false correlation for you guys. But what happens is that in any other obedience, as you know, you can either go up the left side of the English or the Scottish, right? Or you can go up the other side, which is English. You'll get the same understanding at the end of them, but they're played out very, very differently. So some people say, oh, I have the 4th degree because I'm a Mark. That doesn't translate, it doesn't go across. So that's a very good question because I can see how that would be misleading. But no. The Lodge of Perfection is very different in its parts and pieces and story details than the other 3. Great question. See, that was a perfect question. Other great questions. And I don't bite, so feel free. I didn't bite Nathan, so you're safe. Brother Danielle.
Brother Katie, I have heard from Mailcraft friends of mine that there are only 3 degrees of Freemasonry. and that everything else is just isn't any higher than the third degree. What are your thoughts on that comment?
I don't agree. That's my thoughts. I mean, it's a little truncated, but that to me smells a lot of the divide between the ancients and the moderns back in the 1700s, when the premier Grand Lodge of England split into two over this very topic of how many degrees are in Masonry. Originally, there was only one, which is the inter-apprentice degree, and then the fellow craft. The Master Mason, I think, you'd have to talk to brothers who know dates better than I do, but the Master Mason degree was added, I think, in the late 1700s. So, Masonry in itself is evolving. Some Masonic rites only have 25. Memphis Newsroom has 96. There's a lot of different numbers. So to me, it's not so much that there's only 3 degrees of Masonry and that's it. It's more of how many degrees are necessary to get across what Masonry is trying to get. Is that done in 3 degrees, or does it take 33 degrees? It just depends. So, and for those who are curious what male craft is, that's all male Masons. That's how we refer to them here at Universal Co-Masonry. They're all male. Tends to be the Masonry that most people are familiar with. So yeah, Brother Daniel, I would like to hear what you would think when that question's been asked to you.
Hi, sorry, the unmute button wasn't working for me. But when that question's been asked of me, I think one of the challenges I have is that I don't have as much experience in our order to say in some ways, but I will say that from my perspective, there is certainly more to the story that can be told and retold, from what I understand. And in telling and retelling, isn't that more light? So how can it just be ended at just the first rung of those stories? So I'm in agreement with you, Brother Katie.
Well, that's good for my ego. Thank you. Brother Patrick.
There's a question coming in from YouTube.
Yeah.
Georgian Allen asks, do you feel that the English Rite and Scottish have different egregores, or do you think the egregores are similar?
Oh, that's a great question. So for those who may not have heard, the question is coming from YouTube, you said?
From YouTube.
Whether or not the English Rite and the Scottish Rite have different egregores, or are they same? I would say that they're not the same, but I would say that they're similar in that if I can't put a color to them necessarily of what the egregore would look like, though I will get to that in a minute. I've gone through both sides of this ladder myself. There are very different feelings that are evoked in each of the degrees. The 14th feels very different than the HRA. So the egregore is different, but it's not so different that they are truly 2 different types of stories. The 13th degree in the Scottish Rite is very similar to the Holy Roller Arch of Jerusalem. So they do have some overlap. So I would say, no, they're not the same, but they're not so different to make them completely segregated one from the other. I would say that they're similar, and that was a great question. Other questions? Okay. So I don't know, this particular ladder may look overwhelming, but remember, this isn't something you do in a weekend. This is something you do over a lifetime. And it is, it's a grade type system. It's not like, you turn 5 years old and you're put into your PhD program, right? You have to build into it. And that's why in Universal Co-Masonry, we very much take our time as we go through these degrees to make sure that we're not just advancing to advance, because not only is there responsibilities, but we are adding to that thought form. And if we're adding a frenetic thought form to that, it is very disruptive. And in fact, you can say, as we have different workshops here. So we have our big workshop that I was just talking about, where everyone from all over the world comes from. And then we have 2 smaller workshops that are for the English Rite. We have an English Rite workshop. You now know what that means. And we have a Scottish Rite workshop, which you now know what that means. And they feel different. I would say the summer workshop, which is going to be for the first, second, and third degree, has a very different vibration. It's much, I want to say chaotic. It's going to be naturally more frenetic just because there's more people there. But it's also a lot of people of different degrees that are just learning how to control their vibrations and their thoughts. And so that creates a different experience compared to if you go to, let's say, the Scottish Rite workshop, which is going to be the 14th and higher. those tend to be brothers that have been around for a while and have learned how to blend their parts so that they add to the egregore instead of detract from. And it creates a different experience throughout. So again, this is a lifetime process. So if you're looking at that and you're like, oh man, I'm going to be a 33rd by December and you haven't applied yet, well, that's not going to happen. All right, so let's tie this into thought forms. So interestingly enough, the first 3 degrees is called Blue Masonry, which Blue Masonry is, according to Basant Leadbeater's color chart, is pure religious feeling. Now remember that with that the Freemasonry is Judeo-Christian in nature, so it's predicated on King Solomon's Temple. If you hate the Bible, I would not recommend being a Mason necessarily, though you don't have to be Christian or a Jew to be one. There is that. It comes out of King Solomon's Temple and that biblical history. So Blue Masonry is going to affect a thought form that is very much trying to conjure up thought forms that are going to be more religious. And when I say religious, that can take on a lot of tenors. It doesn't have to be like you're going to a church and you're sitting down, though it could be if that's how you look at it. But we're looking at it being devotional. Religious comes from regular, which means to return back or go back to the source. So Freemasonry in the Blue Masonry, so the first 3 degrees, is working on trying to create thought forms that are returning us back to the source, whatever the source may be. That the details are up to each person, but the idea is there. It's like, well, why is it that each lodge has its set colors? Because when we talked with Brother Hardy just a second ago, the 4th degree does not have the same setup as the mark degree. It has different colors, it has different music, it has different drama, it has different offices. When I say offices, like different officers that are in the lodge doing different ritual work. They're all very specific. It wasn't like some guy just woke up and was like, oh, I think the first 3 degrees should be, blue. It's my favorite color. It's blue sky. Why not? That's very, very arbitrary. When we look at Masonry, I have come to find out how deep the arrogance of my ignorance can be. When I'm like, why do we do that? That seems dumb. Everything happens for a reason. Even the Mason is a symbol within his own lodge, and everything has a part that moves with it. And so when we come to Blue Masonry and it's trying to create a vibration that's going to form into a pure religious feeling, that is specific to you. So if I am coming from a particular perception, which everyone is, it's going to create a different thought form. And all of those thought forms are going to come together and create an egregore that is specific to a blue lodge. So when we talk about blue lodge, we're not really talking about the walls are, the outside of the walls are painted blue and it's a blue lodge. We're talking about the thought forms that it's trying to create within us so that we can get back to the source. Interestingly enough, whether it's the English Rite or the Scottish Rite, doesn't matter, from the 4th through the 14th, or the Mark, the Royal Archmariner, or the Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem, this is called red to Blue Masonry. Or I flipped that, excuse me, it should be blue to red. It needs to flip. It's blue to red Masonry. And I thought for a long time, like, why blue to red? Why not just pick a good color? I always like to make it yellow. It's not yellow. I don't know where I got yellow from, but I'm like, oh, why isn't it just like this chunk is yellow? Because that's nice and clean. But the more I started to realize it, there's a reason why it's blue to red. Because when we look at what red Masonry stands for, which is the 18th, their chapter degree, so the 15th through the 18th, that's red Masonry. So you have blue Masonry that's at the bottom, and you have red Masonry that's the 15th through the 18th. You need to have something that helps you get from a pure religious feeling to pure affection. Okay, so when we look at the blue to red Masonry, we're in a transitional understanding, which you got to think takes, in some cases, if you're going the Scottish Rite route, like 10 degrees, or if you're going English route, it takes 3 degrees, or our route, which is 4 degrees, right? The Mark, the Ram, which is the Royal Archmariner, Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem in the 14th. It takes those degrees to help you transition yourself from that pure religious feeling thought form into pure affection. Because I would wonder, if some of you guys know I like to give homework, not that I ever collect it, but if you want homework, I'd be happy to give it to you. It's been a while, so it made me feel better. When we look at pure religious feeling and pure affection, what does that even mean? I mean, the homework would be go sit down and really try to imagine what pure religious feeling is to you. Imagine what the thought form that is emanating from your body is, and then put that into words. You might get your own art piece out of that, depending on what you do. But the 4th through the 14th and the English Rite is helping you get from one to the other. It's helping you understand pure affection. And we talk about affection, it's not a sexual affection. It is, close to agape. It's close to that, the highest type of love, that highest type of affection. Now, the next part, I think some people are going to kind of take a step back and be like, oh, everything they said negative about Masonry is true. But I would ask you to give me at least 1 minute to explain before you make that judgment. So the philosophic degrees, which is the 19th through the 30th, are considered Black Masonry. Now, if you look at Black Masonry on Annie Besant and Leadbeater's, CW Leadbeater's color schema, it's malice. Freemasonry is not teaching you malice. It's not teaching you to hate things and go after things. And and having gone through these degrees, I can tell you, is teaching you how to deal with the malice that's in life. So it's taking a negative and turning it into a positive, and saying malice does exist, right? There is the egregore of evil in this world. How do we as Masons deal with that? We create the world. It's what Mahatma Gandhi, was it Mahatma Gandhi? It says, be the world, the change you wish to see in the world. Got that one right. Be the change you wish to see in the world, because when we make that change, it changes the egregore of malice. If we're putting positive thoughts, depending on how you word it, malice that's not what malice is. We don't want to do malice. Malice is not good. This is how we're going to change it. If we're putting that into the egregore of malice, it detracts. It becomes that deconstructive interference. Because if you have a negative egregore and a positive, life is good type of thought coming towards it, it cancels it out instead of amplifying it. So Black Masonry is not teaching hate, it does not teach malice, it does not teach any of those things. It teaches you how to transmute that into something higher. And if that's not sticking with you, I'll show you an example where this is going to here in a second. White Masonry is the administrative degree. So this is the 31st, the 32nd, and the 33rd. And the 33rd is that last and highest degree of the Scottish Rite. And the governing body of any, here at Universal Co-Masonry is the Supreme Council. They are comprised of 33rd degrees. They are white Masonry. Now, white is not a color, right? And you could technically say black isn't, but they both are, because if you're going to go paint something, you need to have black pigment and white pigment. So it is a color in some sense. Annie Besant and CW Leadbeater did not put devotion on here. That was something that I was toying with. I put reflection, I put devotion. I don't know if I'm sold on what the top color represents, because I need to understand it more. But from my experience, is that it's more of a devotion to the ideal. It's the devotion to the great architect of the universe and to the virtue and valor and honorable conduct that every Mason should have. And if we have a devotion to that, then those who are the guardians of our laws, because we have a grand constitution that we follow and can't just do whatever we want, they will do that in the scope of what is good and right versus self-serving and selfish. So when we look at this schema, how Freemasonry, the art of Freemasonry, is that each degree has a color, has different dramas, has different music. And music is not going to be, Bono and friends playing on, or is it Bono? I never remember how to say it. Is it Bono? I like Bono. And, Bono and whoever coming out and playing, or, Katy Perry or whoever is the greatest. And that's not what the music is. The music is steeped further back. It comes from the 1700s and forward to the 18th and early 20th century. Their musics are all different. And even within their different degrees, whether they're in the blue to red masonry or they're in red masonry, the music is different. The colors are different. The clothing that we wear, which is called regalia, is different. What we wear in the blue lodge is not the same that we wear in the blue to red lodge. And that's the same as, black masonry, we wear something different. White masonry wears something different. We're wearing something different because we're trying to train our thought forms in a different way. When you think about the difference of pure affection, and transforming malice into something higher. Those thought forms take different energy and different context. And you can't do them necessarily in the same space. So every degree in Masonry is its own drama that helps transform and transmute those thought forms into something that is pure and good. So if we go back to the different bodies of man and where these thought forms are said to have come from, the astral and the mental bodies, these dramas, these rituals, the incense, the music, the words, that is poetry and literature, the things that are said in there help refine those bodies so that whatever comes out of them is of the best material, which sounds a lot like alchemy. This is an alchemical process. It's something that makes it transmutive. Remember, transmute means to change one thing to another. So we're changing our thought forms depending on the degree from something base to something higher. And I picked the particular picture on the left because if you look, you have the 3 stages of alchemy, depending on what system you look at. You have the whitening, you have the reddening, and you have the blackening or the negrito. Some systems, they blend the 4th stage, which is citronitas, with the albedo. They kind of become one. That's where you get the 3 heads. But notice also that the heads of this three-headed dragon is yellow. So it's still in there. When we look at that, it's the same thing here. We have the reddening, the blackening, and the whitening. We have that alchemical process. The blue is what allows us to be ready, because if you think about it, we have the lesser mysteries and we have the higher mysteries. After the 3rd degree, which is this step here, it's all higher mysteries. It's all higher degrees is what we call them. They're the higher degrees. So we have to have a foundation, an understanding of something. In this case, Masonry, in order to undergo the transmutation of our thought forms. Because once, again, death of the author, once we create those thought forms, they're no longer ours, and they go out into the egregore of our lives, and it adds or detracts depending on the quality of our thought form. Is it angry or is it peaceful? I talked about the green one, the green thought form, which is sympathy. If I go back here, I'm just going to cruise back to this back slide here. The Royal Arc Mariner, which is an interesting degree in and of itself, is actually green in thought form, which is sympathy, where you're looking at the mark and the HRA being more of that blue to red. But the Royal Arc Mariner, they're always attached. That's what I mean by moored. They're always attached to a mark lodge. So it's supposed to be there. So there's a green in there that's this hidden underneath that's trying to get us something different. It's trying to do something different. So what is the art of Freemasonry? It is looking at the creation and understanding of the quality of our thought forms, and then using ritual and art and all of its different modalities to help transmute it, to help it undergo that alchemical process of going from a base metal to gold in the philosophical sense of the word. It is that whole process. It's painful, but it's beautiful. It is art unto itself. You can have beautiful ritual that is empty of impact. You can have a ritual that's not so perfect, and it's amazing how it impacts you. It can go either way. It all has to do with the thought forms. And each one of these degrees, even like the 1st degree to the 3rd degree, has a different thought form that is being put out there. And Freemasonry is trying to make those thought forms positive versus negative. It's trying to create something that benefits not only the brother, but everyone that comes into its path. So that is the alchemical process. That is taking our rough self and trying to perfect it, which is not just for our own self, but for the betterment of humanity, because we are builders. We are trying to create a space that is specific for humanity, that allows humanity to be its greater self. And each one of us are going to have different thought forms. We can sit in the same meeting and our thought forms be very different. But if we attune to what that thought form or that particular ritual is trying to teach us and get us to understand on a very deep and spiritual level, we'll start to see our thought forms, although they'll never be the same, we'll start to see that they will start to complement each other, and that we can start to build and create. And then we can send that into, the egregore of life and see how it impacts society. Some people will say, well, this is a bunch of hocus pocus. This is pseudoscience. I don't think that's necessarily true, because if you look at the impact, like I think they had it recently, in the last 5 years at least, 100 people met in Washington, D.C. to pray. Now, granted, that didn't take over the entire world and the whole world was transformed in 1 second, but it did create something. And that something, that thought form did go out into the various aggregors, that's the United States in this case, and it does have an impact. And if more and more people chose to be the change they wish to see in the world, we would start to see that the world is what we want it to be. When we look back to the pandemic, and we look, especially in the United States, it's very divisive. There's still some trails of that that's still very divisive. When we buy into the thought forms of others that are divisive, then we are only making it that which we contribute to. So hopefully you'll take away from this particular lecture, this particular presentation on the art of Freemasonry, is that the degrees exist not to put feathers in our cap and wear awesome, jewels that say, I'm this degree or that degree. It's to signify the thought form of what that degree represents. That jewel is a reminder of, this is what I obligated myself to create. And this is what I want to create. And this is how I'm going to do it. And yes, it's going to be painful, because change is always painful, but it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, if I die regretted and live as if I was emulating the most important people in the world in my life, then I have lived well. And that is the art of Freemasonry. It is the craft. It takes skill. It takes skill to be self-effacing and to take ownership of our thought forms. That's a skill. No one likes to be told they're wrong. No one. No one's like, oh yes, please tell me I'm wrong all the time. No one likes to hear that. But if we can take that and say, I own that, and I can change that, and I can make it something, I can transmute it. I can go through the blackening, the distillation, the purification, and ultimately create something that is beautiful. Then I have added to the art of humanity. I've added to the beauty of humanity. And if you are of a religious background, you can say, well, that would be akin to having a holies of holies here on earth where God would dwell within, or the great architect, or the creator, or whatever the highest is. Creating that space where the soul and the body are actually co-workers, instead of fighting with each other for control of mastership of this experience, but they're co-workers. And that ultimately we can refine the various parts of the body so that the spirit can emanate forward and create thought forms that are for the beauty of all. That is the art of Freemasonry. That is why we have degree systems. And that's why it's very important that if someone were wanting to join, or someone has joined, that we join for the right reasons. Because we're playing, I don't want to say playing, we are using an experience that is much more than just the tangible sensory experience. It's something that goes deeper and is more profound. And with that, we are at the end of our presentation this evening. Like I said, I'll stay on for the next 10 minutes if there are any questions that anyone has, any thoughts they'd like to share, or if you request an application, I would be the one to ask as well. But if you want homework again, go sit down and try to sketch or visualize what thought forms you put off every day in any situation. And then maybe by giving consciousness to that, it will allow you to change it to be what you want it to be. Because then you're the master. You're the master of your own experience and the way that you interact. And that would be the homework I'd give you. So thank you everyone for being with us. I want to say thank you again for those who are coming in from Zoom as well, because it's lovely to see faces, as well as those who are coming from the 3 different platforms we're streaming from. And I want to thank Brother Patrick Alessandra, as well as Brother Benjamin Hartle, for being our IT guys and taking care of that as well. So if you would like to step off, you're more than welcome to. Next month, as I say, I always try to intuit would be the best topic. So I think it might be government of the craft. I'm not sure, but stay tuned. We'll also have an international seminar, which is on the 3rd Wednesday at noon Mountain Time, which is 6 p.m. Ghanaian time. And that will be the same topic, but Brother Patrick will be presenting that as well. So you can get a different perspective. And if you really want to know a master of thought forms, it's Brother Patrick. He understands that really, really well. So I would tune in if you want a follow-up, or if you have questions that come up in between now and then. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. And for those who are joining us from the Philippines, have a wonderful morning. And anywhere else in the world, have a wonderful whatever type of day, night, or afternoon it may be. Take care.